All right, we are here at 2 o'clock. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cassandra White, a grants program manager at the Division of Arts and Culture.
And I'm Jennifer Goodo, another program manager here at the division.
This webinar is to help you learn how to manage your grants for fiscal year 2027. We're joined by Terry Apstein, Assistant Director of the Division, Sam Brown, a grants program administrator, and Audrey McKenzie, another grants program manager. They will be watching the chat. During the presentations, participants are muted and cameras are turned off. However, there is a chat feature available, so if you have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to join in the chat box. As I said, we have several people on who will be monitoring the chat, and they will answer your questions as we go. We'll also have times for a Q&A at the end of the presentation. And just to get ahead of all the questions, we will be posting the PowerPoint slides and a recording of the webinar on our website, so you'll be able to review anything you need to. Today, Today, we are going to cover what you need to know about managing your general program support or specific cultural project grants for the Division of Arts and Culture. That includes how to do your contract, how to amend your contract, how to request funds, how to document those funds, and how to do the required reports. This is the grant timeline. This information is all on our website and in your contract if you ever forget. The first step is once your grant has been funded is to submit the contract details. Contract details are the part of your contract that is specific to your grant, your award amount, your budget, your deliverables. Once we review your contract details, we'll generate a contract and send it back to you by your signature. Try to have your signed contract back to us by September 1st. Once your contract is executed, you can start requesting funds. On January 30th, 2027, you'll have a mid-year report due. This is a short progress report asking about the first half of the grant period, July 1st through December 31st. On June 30th, the grant period ends. You'll need to have requested all your payments and spent all your funds by this date. And on July 30th, your final report is due. This is a more in-depth report about your programs, your budget, your evaluation, and how many people you have reached. It has both statistical and narrative questions.
All right, starting with your contract details. To access your contract details, log in to dosgrants.com, click Grants on the purple bar, click My Grants from the drop-down menu. You should only be able to see grants for organizations with which you're affiliated. The most recent grant will have a grant number starting with 27. When you see it, click Details all the way to the right. This will take you to your grant record details page. Scroll about 3/4 of the way to the bottom to a section called Forms and Reports, then look for Contract Details Form. The screenshot says View because they've already completed their contract details, but yours should say Edit. And this is what your contract details should look like. You should see on the right-hand side of the screen, there's a button to edit. If you don't see it, you may need to scroll to the right. You can also see these tabs across the top: deliverables, budget, scope of work, and contact info. You need to review and, if necessary, edit each of these tabs. General program support grants are split into 4 equal payments. Each payment has a deliverable and documentation. A deliverable is what your organization is doing. Documentation is what you can provide as proof of what your organization produced. You need to complete the deliverable and submit the documentation in order to receive a payment. Because there are 4 payments, there needs to be a deliverable and documentation attached to all 4 payments. Because a deliverable is about what you produced, deliverables and documentation don't need to be a direct reflection of your budget. For example, lots of organizations use their grant award for, say, paying their executive director, and that's perfectly fine. But at the same time, you didn't receive this grant to pay your director. You received this grant to produce arts and cultural programming in Florida. Your director is a necessary part of creating that program, but they're not the purpose. So no matter how you allotted your budget, your deliverables should still be about what your organization is doing for arts and cultural programming. You also want to keep your deliverables simple and non-specific. We have some examples here. Museums often say that they will execute at least one exhibition, theaters, at least one production, or at least one artist contract. You can choose whatever documentation makes sense to you. The easiest thing is typically provide marketing materials and or programs. As I said, you have four payments. However, you only need to come up with three deliverables. Deliverable one is auto-populated. It's going to be the same for everybody. Don't change it. To complete deliverable one, you have to submit a certification from the grants management quiz that we have linked at the end of this webinar, and you have to submit a timeline of planned grant activities. Grant activities being your arts and culture programming. We're going to talk more about requesting your first payment later. Point being, the first deliverable is easy to complete because we want everyone to have access to their funds as soon as possible. The next tab on your contract details page is your budget. You'll see that the budget from your application is already copied into your contract. Obviously, a lot can happen in a year, so if you want to revise or update your budget, you can do that. I would recommend putting your grant funds into as few line items as possible. When you turn in your final report at the end of the year, your actual spending of grant funds needs to be within 20% of your contract budget. That can be harder to track when you have grant funds spread out across categories. One large allowable expense is so much easier to account for. Just make sure that you're specific about your line items, meaning don't have miscellaneous, and make sure you're aware of non-allowable costs. Note, your contract budget should include cash match and in-kind. You can change that too. Just make sure that you're specific about your line items, meaning don't have miscellaneous, and make sure you're aware of non-allowable costs. This is a quick refresher on non-allowable and match-only expenses for updating your contract. You would have considered this when you submitted your application, but as a reminder, these cannot be anywhere attached to your project. A lot of these are obvious. No credit card or bank fees, no private entertainment, no food or drinks, no regranting, no scholarships, no lobbying, no taxes, except payroll taxes. Those are fine. Just a reminder that you may not use state or federal funds as match. Also, you may not use funds that you are using for match for other Department of State grants. Your contract budget does not show where your match funds come from, but be aware of these restrictions for when you submit your final report. Match-only funds means you can have this on your contract, but they cannot be paid for with grant funds. That's phone bills, utilities, building maintenance, travel, space rental. These are all going to be in the guidelines, and if you have any specific questions, contact your program manager.
The third area of your contract details is the scope of work. The scope of work is just the four deliverables together in a paragraph. Here are some examples from last year. You'll notice that they both start with the introductory package of requirements. They then go on to describe execute a minimum of one production, execute a minimum of one exhibition, execute a minimum of one artist contract for the example festival. And you'll see that there are several others there too. The last thing we do with the contract details is select a grant contact who will be responsible for all of the correspondence about this grant. This person needs to have a phone number and an email in our system. If your grant manager doesn't see the person you designate in the system, you will need to add them. We will go over that on the next slide. Your address will also appear in your contract. It needs to match the address on your Florida Substitute W-9 form. If prompted to add a new staff member, you can click on your organization's name in the grid at the top of the screen. That will take you to your organization profile. We have cropped these screenshots so they may not look quite the same on your monitor, but you will want to find Manage Staff and then Add New Staff Member. Fill out all of this information, including the email and phone number. If the email or phone number is missing, you will get an error message when trying to submit your contract details. Make sure that you click Yes here at the bottom. The person you're adding will receive an email asking them to confirm their account. Once they accept, they will automatically be added as a viewer. Let your program manager know, and your program manager can give them full permissions to request payments, submit reports, and otherwise manage your grants in the portal. You'll look at your contract details, update your deliverables, your budget, your scope of work, your contact information, and then submit. Staff will review your contract details and generate your contract. When your contract is ready, you'll be able to download it from this contract form section on your grant record details page. You need to get your contract signed by an authorized official and a witness. You can do digital signatures, just make sure there are no Adobe security measures added on your document. Once it's signed by both parties, you can upload your entire contract, not just the page that you sign in your current substitute W-9, into DOS Grants. You upload them to the same place, the contract form. If the contract has security restrictions that prevents us from signing it, or you have not included your substitute W-9, it will be returned to you. Our division director starts signing off on contracts and getting them executed around August 1st. Please note that your contract cannot be executed if you're in non-compliance at the time. Usually people are in non-compliance because they didn't submit their final report on a previous grant. If you want to check back, you can see the status of your contract in the Forms and Reports section of the grant record details page. It will say executed once the contract process is complete. Here are some of the things that might interfere with your contract being executed. We can't execute your contract if you're in non-compliance. The biggest reason people are not in non-compliance, as I said, is not submitting the report in a previous grant. If you've had your grant for the 25-26 fiscal year, make sure your report is submitted. There are two places that need signatures in the contract, the acknowledgement page and the debarment suspension ineligibility page. If you do not sign the contract in both places, it will be returned to you. We also can't execute a contract if it's not signed by an authorizing official and a witness. This shouldn't be an issue, but we cannot execute a contract if your organization does not have a UEI number in your organization profile. This is a newer requirement. UEI stands for Unique Entity Identifier. You can get one from SAM.gov linked here. It's pretty quick if you don't run into any issues. If you do run into issues, start a ticket with the Federal Service Desk. This is a totally separate entity from us, so we cannot do anything behind the scenes to problem solve or expedite this. If you don't have one, which you should because of the applications, please start that process now.
All right, time for everyone's favorite part. You worked so hard to get it all done, and finally, it is time to get paid. Okay, to recap, the total grant award will be dispersed in 4 equal payments. Each payment needs a completed deliverable, and most importantly, you need to request the payments to receive them. It is not automatic. Funds become available for request on a quarterly basis. All payment requests need to be approved by June 30th, 2027, the end of the grant period, at the very latest. However, we recommend you submit your final payment by the first week of June. This will give the division time to process the payment internally and forward the request to financial services, who must process the payment by June 15th in order to avoid delays. Because the state's fiscal year ends on June 30th, financial services pauses the process of paying requests on June 15th. Payment requests approved between June 15th and June 30th will not be dispersed before August. Let's start with the first payment. As we mentioned, the first payment is triggered by execution of the contract. However, to request it, you will need 2 additional documents, the timeline of grant activities and the grant management quiz certificate. And this is an example of a timeline of grant activities. It should include all the events in the year of the grant. If some events are still undetermined, please write that with a general idea of what will go there. For example, Children's Story Hour theme to be determined, or stage a musical still to be decided. This is an example of a quiz certificate with the new logo. After the end of this webinar, you can follow this link. We're posting the PowerPoint, and the link is also in the chat. Thank you very much, Audrey. Or you can go to our webpage, click on Grants, and the Grants Management Quiz is the last entry in the drop-down window. Then you need to take the quiz, and if you score a 100, you will receive the certificate at the email address you indicated on the form. We do not receive a copy of the certificate, so you'll need to upload it onto DOS Grants as part of your payment request.
All right. If you have executed the contract and you have two required documents, the timeline and the quiz certificate, you can request the first payment. To do so, you are going to log into your account on DOS Grants. Like before, from the dashboard, select My Grants in the Grants drop-down window. Then, from the My Grants page, click the Details button before you go to your current grant details page. Now, the grant record details page is the hub of your grant. Everything starts from here. So my recommendation is to bookmark this page. From here, you can click the Request Payment button. This will launch the payment request page. Again, you will not be able to request a payment until your contract has been executed. Simply, the Request Payment button will not be there if it appears only after the contract is executed. Okay, now we are on the payment request page. Select the deliverables. To do so, click on the little square by the deliverable number. Then you'll enter the invoice period dates. The begin date must be July 1st for all payment requests. The end date should be the date of the payment request. And remember, it cannot be a future date. Please use the ATTN field to name who in your organization submitted the payment so we can communicate with the right person in case we need to. Please do not put in the name of your program manager here. And then finally, you must upload all the required documentation for the deliverable. In this case, the payment number 1, we are uploading the timeline of grant activities and the quiz certificate. You do not need to upload the contract, it's already in the system. However, for payments 2, 3, and 4, make sure to upload all the documentation listed for each deliverable. And here's how to upload the payment documentation. Click Add a new file. Enter the title and description in the appropriate boxes. For example, we are requesting the second payment. The deliverable description is execute a minimum of 1 exhibition. So the title in the payment documentation box can be the title of your exhibition, and the description be the type of documentation you are providing. In this case, it would be marketing materials. At this point, you upload a file from your computer by clicking Select a File, which will open a new window if you're on a PC where you can find the file you wish to upload. After the file uploads, you will need to click Update. Once you click Update, you should see the link View File. If you have more than one file to upload, you can repeat the process. Then, when you are done uploading files, click the Submit button. But wait, you are not done. Once you click the Submit Payment button, the confirmation page, the payment request confirmation page opens. Here you can review the information and then check the authorization box, enter your electronic signature, and click Submit again. Now you are done. The system will take you back to the hub, your grant record details page, and you will see the message, Payment request has been submitted. Also, you will see the payment status as requested. If the payment request is not submitted, the system will not take you back to this page. If that happens, look for an error message in red somewhere on the payment request page. It will describe what needs to be edited. Another hint that the payment request has not been submitted is that under payment status, instead of requested, you will see the word preparing.
Okay, to clarify, after October 1st and before you submit the second payment request, you need to have expended the first payment, completed the second deliverable, and submitted the expenditure log demonstrating how the first payment was spent. More information about the expenditure log is coming up. For the third payment request, you will need to have expended the second payment, completed the third deliverable, and submitted the expenditure log demonstrating how all funds you received so far have been spent. The same thing for the fourth payment. You will have to expend the third payment, completed the fourth deliverable, and submit the expenditure log demonstrating how all funds you have received so far have been spent. Here are some basic rules for the expenditure log. The expenditure log should account for expenditures that contain grant funds only. You don't need to enter cash match and in-kind in the expenditure log. It's more work for you that isn't necessary. Each line item needs to correspond to one transaction, which means one check or one EFT only. Please do not group transactions together. Please double check your contract details to see what budget categories can contain grant funds. If you put them in the wrong categories, we will have to return the expenditure log and it will delay your payment approval. You will be updating the same expenditure log during the entire grant period. Therefore, as you add expenditures, please check the total amount for each budget category. You can exceed or come short of the total for each budget category by 20% plus or minus, but no more. Again, we will have to return the expenditure log in that case. Okay, so here's how to complete and submit the expenditure log. Again, let's go back to DOS Grants and from the dashboard, like you did before, select My Grants and then click on Details to go to the Hub, your grant record details page. Once there, scroll down to the Forms and Reports block, the same one where you found the contract details before, but this time click on Edit Log. Now you are on the expenditure log page. In order to start recording expenses, click on Add New Record. This will open a window in front of your log. And here, in that window, is where you enter all the information about each transaction. You only need to enter information either in the invoice box or the transaction number. If you have an invoice number, you can use it in the invoice box, or you can enter a check number or a direct deposit reference number in the transaction box. In any case, one of these two boxes must have info. The payment date is the date on the check or the date that the bank executed the direct deposit. The payee is the name of the person or organization you paid. While it can be the name of one of your employees, it cannot be the name of your organization. The transaction total is the amount you wrote on the check or you sent through EFT. Under grant funds, you enter the amount you wish to allocate to grant funds. It can be a portion of the transaction total or it can be the total. Obviously, it can't be more than the transaction total. Leave blank the cash match and in-kind boxes unless you are entering the remainder of a total expense in cash match. For instance, if you want to keep your grant numbers easy and your director gets paid in intervals of $1,119, for example, you may want to enter $1,100 in grant funds and $19 in cash match. The deliverable number should correspond to the deliverable for which you are reporting expenses. For example, if you have received the first payment and you're documenting how you spent those funds before requesting the second payment, you should choose number 1. And if you're about to request the third payment, you're now documenting how you spent the second payment. So choose number 2. The budget item box is very important. Here you need to select the budget category for which you are reporting grant funds. You need to check the contract details and make sure you are selecting the correct budget category for each expenditure entry. The description box is optional, but here, if you wish, you can give a brief description of the expenditure. When all information is entered, click Update. The transaction will then appear in the expenditure log. This is what the expenditure log will look like. Simply add new records until the expenditure log is complete and up to date. You can review it to make sure it's correct and all expenditures are allowable. You can use the comments box if you need to include information that may help your grant manager when reviewing the expenditure log. Finally, when you're done, you can click Submit and turn in the expenditure log. You will do this for each payment after the first one. Now, after you click Submit, you will no longer be able to edit a submitted expenditure. If you realize there is a typo or you made a mistake, you can contact your program manager who will return the line item or even the whole expenditure log so you can click on Edit and correct it. Also, if we find a mistake, we will return the expenditure log so that you can correct it. If this happens, you will receive an email from your program manager explaining what you need to correct. And here to recap a few things to remember about the expenditure log. Check your contract budget before adding grant fund records to make sure the budget category you select is one agreed to in the contract. Check the total of each budget category recorded to make sure you don't exceed the plus or minus 20% leeway. Also, to clarify and answer a question that comes up often, if, for example, one of your staff performs double duties and they fall into two different budget categories, you can list the same transaction total twice and then allocate 50% of the total amount to each budget category.
Okay, so after you submit a payment request, we review it, approve it, and send it to the Department of Financial Services. You should receive the funds in about 3 to 4 weeks from approval, depending on whether you are receiving checks or direct deposits. The first payment will take longer than the rest, usually about 8 weeks, so request that payment as soon as your contract is executed. If you don't request direct deposit, you will receive a check. We recommend requesting direct deposit because it's faster, easier, and doesn't get lost in the mail. You, as the grantee, may choose to use electronic funds transfer, EFT, to receive grant payments. To participate in this direct deposit program, vendors and payees must use the Department of Financial Services Florida Integrated Payee System to submit the request. This is an invitation-only portal. Vendors and payees must contact the state agency for which they are receiving payments, that's us, to initiate the invitation. To be eligible for an invitation to the integrated payee system, grantees must have received at least one payment from the state of Florida via warrant within the past 12 months. For tools and information that allow you to check on payments, please visit the link on the slide and that Audrey put on the chat. If you have received EFT payments in the past 12 months, you should continue to receive them. And I just wanted to add, we are not involved in the uh, DFS process. Uh, the more info on the link with more info on EFT shows you how to track your payments and shows you how to call DFS. There are two reports that you will have to submit as part of your grant. First, we'll talk about the mid-year report. This is really quick and easy. It's essentially a progress report. It has two sections. The first is grant progress, which is text. This doesn't have to be a dissertation, but if you could say specifically what you've accomplished by this point, that would be ideal. The second is impact numbers, meaning how many opportunities for public participation and how many individuals benefited. These are separate questions. There are separate questions for virtual participation. The second report that you need to submit is the final report. This one is a bit more involved. That report is going to ask you about activities, evaluation methods, impact numbers, and your budget, including your cash match. The budget of the final report is going to be a bird's eye categories, like in the application. Your expenditure log should be complete when you submit the final report. You'll need to provide support materials with sponsorship credit, and we'll talk about that in a second. You can find both reports here on the grant record details page. It's about halfway down under the progress reports section. The reports become available several months before the due date. We will let you know by email. Once you submit, your program manager will review it. If we find something that we need to address, we will get in touch with you.
All right, the Single Audit Act. All grantees are subject to the Single Audit Act. Let me explain what that means for you. The Florida Single Audit Act states that anyone, individual or organization, who expends more than $750,000 in state assistance within a fiscal year is subject to a higher standard of auditing. State assistance means any state funds, not just from the Department of State. There's a similar act called the Federal Single Audit Act, which has been on the books since 1984. The Federal Single Audit Act states that anyone expending more than $1 million in federal assistance within a fiscal year is subjected to stricter auditing. Now, my guess is that for most people on this webinar, you're not expending anywhere near $750,000 in state or federal funds. And if you are, you probably already know that. But what's new about the Florida Single Audit Act is that everyone who receives state funds is required to submit a form stating whether they've crossed that threshold in state or federal funds. And you can do that in DOS grants. Let me show you how. The FSAA is a little different than the other requirements we've talked about because it's tied to your organization, not your grant. So you'll need to navigate to your organization profile. If you're still on your grant record details page, you can click your organization name. Or you can select Organization on the purple bar and then select View My Organizations on the drop-down menu. Because the FSAA is related to your organization's fiscal year, you'll need to have a fiscal year end date listed in your organization profile before you can submit the form. If you don't have one or you need to change yours, click Edit Organization. Once your fiscal year end date passes, you won't be able to change it yourself. If that happens, contact your program manager. If you have a fiscal year end date listed and it's correct, click that fourth tab that reads Single Audit Act. The day after your fiscal year end date, you'll see a pending record here and a button to edit. The form is going to ask you to confirm your fiscal year end date, whether you share an FEIN with a larger entity, and whether you've expended more than $750,000 in state or federal funds. That's not state and federal funds combined, it's state or federal funds. If you say that you have expended that $750,000 or more in state or federal funds, you'll be prompted to submit a financial report. The form and the financial record are due 9 months after the fiscal year end date to give you some time to wrap up accounting. As of now, we don't have a notification system to trigger grantees to submit their FSAA forms. We're working on it, but we don't have it yet. If you have more questions about the FSAA, here are a few resources. You can follow these links from the PowerPoint, which will be posted on our website after the conclusion of today's webinar.
Okay, the final piece of reporting you are responsible for is the Notice of International Travel. The Office of International Affairs is now part of the Division of Arts and Culture. As part of our responsibilities to facilitate trade and cultural exchange with Florida's international partners, we ask that all grantees notify the Department of State at any international travel at least 30 days before the date of international travel is to commence, or as soon as becomes feasible after forming your travel plans. To do this, we ask you to complete a form on our website. It is located under the Grants tab in the Grants Forms and Documents section. And again, this is our website, not DOS grants. And just to clarify, because I don't see it in here, this is not individual travel out of country. This is organization sponsored travel. So if you are going on vacation to Italy, congratulations. That's wonderful. I hope you have a lovely time. That's not something you need to report to us. All right, now we have some links for useful information, the guidelines, DOS grants, a DOS grants FAQ, and our calendar. Thank you so much, Audrey. For any further questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to your program manager. They're listed here. The team is always ready and happy to assist you. So you can see that we've had a few people move around what areas they are managing. Please keep that in mind so that you email the right person. But if you get the wrong person, we'll forward it on. All right, it is time for questions and answers. Feel free to put things in the chat if you have a question. I'm scrolling back to make sure that I answered everything in the chat itself. Looks like we have so far. Brenda, great question. After taking the quiz for the grants management quiz, you should have the certificate. It should be automatically emailed to the email you provided when taking the quiz. However, it's also provided at the end of the quiz, so you can copy it and save it from there. Yes, Haley, there's definitely a way to reach people directly. These are our direct emails if this is your first time managing a state grant. So depending on what your um, discipline is, go ahead and email the correct person. Julie, yes, the Florida Single Audit Act is due 9 month. The Florida Single Audit Act certification form, which is what is due, I believe, 9 months after the end of your fiscal year. And that's your fiscal year, not ours. So make sure you have that uploaded in the organization. We also have a handy little handout on how to complete it that your grant manager can send to you if you need. When we complete our sorry, I'm reading out loud instead of reading to myself. Yes, when you're completing your li log for the final report, go ahead and select deliverable for those transactions because that is the deliverable that you are recording the transactions for. Uh, FOR, not FOUR. So the final one should be deliverable for. Yes. All right. Any other questions, folks? And again, please feel free to email any of the people on this list, and you will get faster answers if you email the person who oversees your area. If it shows as pending for 2020, oh, sorry, for the Single Audit Act, if it's showing as pending for 2026, unless you have gone past the due date, which should be in the far right column, you are fine. Um, it just shows up the day after your fiscal year ends. So that's why it's generated like that. So you can fill it out earlier if you already know the answers. All right. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. Thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. We got through this in record time. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the people on this slide. And remember that this will be posted with the recording and the slides on our website as soon as we can. You all have a nice day.